Thank you, Meg, and welcome to everybody who is listening in today to the webinar about Ermione. I think we're going to have some fun today. How can we not, with three such terrific and distinguished guest artists with us today? And as Meg alluded, because they are illustrious artists, they are busy. As she mentioned, Angela Meade is currently in the midst of a run of Verdi's Un ballo in Maschera at the Met. Um, Antony Walker has just opened Wagner's The Flying Dutchman at Pittsburgh Opera, where he is the music director. And he had an exciting last minute save involving a soprano who has roots here in DC. And Lawrence Brownlee is in Chicago appearing in The Daughter of the Regiment, which is an opera among several that he's performed here in DC with great success. And there's a contingent of Washington concert opera aficionados that went as a group to hear him in The Daughter of the Regiment there. After he's done with Ermione, he's going to go to Dresden to sing Bellini's I Puritani, another opera he's performed in DC, this one with Washington Concert Opera. And darned if he and his leading lady, both in Chicago and in Dresden, Lisette Oropesa, aren't going to record that Puritani after they're done with it in Dresden. So it's all very, very exciting. And I want to begin with a little bit of background about Ermione as an opera, and then get into a couple of musical excerpts that we have featuring Angela and Larry performing operas that were written by Rossini during this same period. In Angela's case, an actual excerpt from Ermione in a live performance, and in Larry's, another piece from the same era called Zelmira from a performance he sang in 2019 with Washington Concert Opera. But we start with the fact that when Rossini was in his early 20s, it coincided with a period when Naples was a cultural capital in Europe. In terms of opera capitals, it was actually even more important than Milan, with its Teatro alla Scala. And this was all because of the ruling Bourbon dynasty in Naples at the time, which very much favored spending a lot of money on art and on music. And a gentleman named Domenico Barbaia was hired by the court to become impresario of the Royal Theater, the Teatro San Carlo, with a mandate of find a very talented young composer to write new operas that will re-engage the audience so that our box office is strong and that there's a lot of buzz around opera, the same way that there had been several years ago when beloved composers like Domenico Cimarosa and Giovanni Paisiello, whose operas today we see as names in history books, but were once very, very popular, ruled the roost. So Barbaia knew that in 1814, Rossini had these back-to-back huge triumphs with an opera called Tancredi, which was a serious opera, a tragedy, and his Italian Girl in Algiers, L'Italiana in Algeri. And these two operas sort of cemented Rossini's fame as the hottest property among young opera composers. So Barbaia said, Rossini, I would like to sign you to a contract for 7 years as composer in residence to the Royal Theater, the Teatro San Carlo. You have to write one opera minimum every year. You have a guaranteed paycheck. We have a fully professional orchestra, by no means always the case back then in Italian opera houses. And we have an ensemble of singers that is the envy of every opera house in Europe right now. So Rossini, being no dummy, said, sure, let's do this. And his first opera for the San Carlo was basically a pastiche. He took the numbers that had been most popular from otherwise not very successful operas he had written, stitched them together with an opera about a historical personage who was very popular with opera audiences at that time, Queen Elizabeth I of England, and called the opera Elisabetta, Regina d'Inghilterra, tailored it for the prima donna of the San Carlo, a Spanish-born lady named Isabella Cobran, who was the darling of Naples at that point. And it was a big enough success to buy Rossini lots of goodwill to keep churning out the operas. So that is the setup for what we get to with Ermione in 1819. The opera itself was based on the 1677 tragedy, French classical drama by Jean Racine called Andromaque, based on the aftermath of the Trojan War. It had been very popular in its day, and given that Rossini had written almost entirely serious dramas for the Teatro San Carlo, and he had written very carefully to be sure that not only Isabella Cobran, but his two leading tenors that he had in his stable of artists to choose from in terms of writing leading roles would have really nifty roles that showed them off to great advantage. It seemed like Ermione would be a big, huge success. And instead, everybody in the audience on opening night kind of scratched their head and said, WTF, dude, this totally is not working. And within a few performances, Ermione just went thud and disappeared. And we will sort of pick up the kind of wonderful back from the grave story of this masterpiece after we play a couple of pieces by Rossini that introduce the composer and this style and this opera and our artists to you. So can we start with a piece that the Teatro San Carlo, the theater for which the opera was written, mounted the bicentenary year in 2019 of the opera's 1819 premiere. And Angela Meade did the title character. I think it's easiest to just sort of sum up the plot like this. Mr. Brownlee's character of Orestes, Oreste in Italian, very much wants Angela Meade's character, Ermione. She doesn't want to give him a tumble. She only wants Pyrrho, who is the son of Achilles, who is totally uninterested in Ermione. He only wants Andromache, who is the widow of the murdered king Hector, who only wants her dead husband. So that's set up for this. And we're going to hear Angela singing an aria as Ermione near the beginning of Act 2, where Pyrrho has said, I'm going to marry Andromache, who has just come through the palace and been confronted by Ermione, who has insulted her. But Andromache is sort of noble and sad and forgives Ermione and goes off. And Ermione tells Pyrrho's tutor, Fenicio, go tell Pyrrho that I still love him and tell him that you have seen me weeping. And she begins with a bit of recitativo talking about Andromache. She says, Essa corre al trionfo. She is leaving me in triumph, meaning she wins, I lose. And then she addresses Fenice, saying to tell Pyrrho, vedi che vedisti, di che vedisti il piangere. Tell him that you have witnessed my tears. And this is part of a bigger scene, but it gives an idea very much of the style that Rossini is writing in for this opera, for his principles. So let's hear that and see that if we may. All right. Now, a couple of things to note there. We think of Rossini, if we know a broad cross section of his most popular pieces that have been done frequently, as someone who broke sung speech called recitativo and his numbers into very discrete parts. In this opera, he's blurring the line constantly between the two, and you hear some of it right there. Ermione does go into a melodic part of her aria, but the kind of back and forth between declamatory recitative and singing melodic parts of the aria, that is very much of a piece of the type of writing that Rossini does in a lot of this particular score. And I think that what he's doing is forecasting what would happen about 30 to 35 years down the pike when we start getting to the operas by Giuseppe Verdi during his early middle period. Think Rigoletto and La Traviata in the 1850s, where you don't listen to those pieces and think, gosh, I wish they'd hurry up and get through this recitative section and get to the numbers, because everything that is happening is so engaging that you don't ever want the characters to stop talking to one another and communicating with themselves, because musically every thought is so interesting. And I think, Angela, you're singing Ballo in Maschera right now. There's a lot of that in Verdi's writing too. Yes, the arias for all of the principals, Verdi lavishes generously upon them, but all of the connective tissue in between is of such a high quality that you never have a sense of the musical and theatrical energy dropping. And I think that that gives you an idea of this and just that snippet that we heard of Ermione. And I want to get you talking about that more, but first, our tenor. Not necessarily the tenor in this, because I think that this is one of maybe two roles that Rossini wrote for this tenor, Giovanni David, that Lawrence Brownlee has not yet taken on and performed live. But one that he did sing, that Rossini tailor-made for Giovanni David, was the part of Prince Ilo in Zelmira, performed here in the spring of 2019. And the setup for the entrance of that character is that he doesn't appear until, I think, about 25 or 30 minutes into the first act. But when he does arrive back in his homeland, and yes, it's the Isle of Lesbos, and starts singing, it's a breathtaking scene that lasts for about 10 or so minutes, where Rossini never cuts the tenor any slack. It is a bravura piece from beginning to end. And you'll hear the last 2 to 3 minutes of the end of it, the cabaletta, as sung by Larry in that live performance. And it gives you an idea of exactly the kind of stuff at which Giovanni David excelled. Extraordinary facility and bravura technique. And so Rossini just kept throwing it at him. So here's a little bit of Prince Ilo in the end of his first scene, as written in Rossini's Zelmira, sung by Lawrence Brownlee.
La bianca mano no si Cara, che a te divi nel tuo bel seno, vola, vola, saprei, vola, ne, saprò, sì, vola, ne, saprò,
Now, if those two excerpts by Angela and Larry don't give you a very clear idea of why it is that Maestro Walker would have said, I've got a great idea, let's do Ermione, I don't know what would, because Ermione is not the kind of opera you go to with the army you have. And that is sort of part of the reason of how operas like Ermione, and specifically Ermione among Rossini's operas, have enjoyed new life. Since the centenary year of the composer's death in 1968, it was during that year that this gradual movement began of Rossini conductors, or conductors that really thought that there was stuff worth taking a look at in the Rossini archive, in conjunction with musicologists like the late American Philip Gossett. Everybody sort of said, you know, we think that there's stuff there. They found manuscripts in libraries all over Europe, but here's the rub. We had to find singers that were capable in all voice categories, not just sopranos, of which there had been here or there, people like Maria Callas or Joan Sutherland, but everybody, mezzo-sopranos, tenors, a bass here or there. And gradually that groundswell occurred, and that happened. And when it did, we were able to sort of go back and say, you know, we don't know why it is that audiences didn't appreciate Ermione. It could just be that it was too much of a blend of recitativo. It could be that the music is at such a high pitch of intensity that it was a little bit too driven. We don't know. But what we do know is that ever since in 1987, the opera had its rediscovery at the opera festival named for Rossini in his native town of Pesaro, everyone has been saying, wow, what a wonderful piece.
Yeah.
So over to our artists, Angela, Antony, and Larry.
Good. Great.
First of all, your introduction to operas of this style, serious Rossini operas. How did that happen for each of you in terms of people saying, you know, we think that there's some stuff there and we think that you can and maybe should seriously investigate this? Any discovery stories there you'd like to share?
I'll go. I sang for Will Crutchfield right towards the beginning of my career, and he immediately he said, "I'd like you to sing Semiramide," and I thought, "You're insane! I can't sing that. There's too many notes. My voice doesn't do that." And he was like, "I think you're wrong." And I told him I would work on it with him, and then we did it, and it seemed like a good fit. So, and it led to me doing, 4 other Rossini's other than that. So,
And to clarify, Angela, Semiramide is one of the other parts that he wrote for Isabella Colbran, yeah?
Yeah.
You've sung roles that are also really, really, demanding, that were written for another great diva of the 19th century, Giuditta Pasta, who created Norma. And we get all hung up in the 21st century on voice types and categories. Oh, this one is really a mezzo soprano. She's not a soprano. And there are all kinds of people who say, oh, if Isabella Colbran were around today, everybody would say, well, she's a mezzo soprano, duh. Having sung roles that were written for both of those singers, any generalities you can make, or is it just sort of like, nah, you just have to sing it with your own voice? I don't know.
I mean, I think the great thing about Rossini is that you have the option of ornamenting up if your voice so does that, or ornamenting down if you do that, and being able to sit sort of where your voice is comfortable. But I do agree with you that we often get stuck pigeonholing people into one way or another. And I think that a lot of the tessitura of how Rossini sits fits very well for me. And again, with the option of doing extension things and not sitting up there the entire time.
Maestro Brownlee, you have such a kind of connection with Rossini. Talk to us about that. I mean, how did it first come about that you found out, first of all, that you could do this in terms of singing coloratura? And then how did it progress to the point where this became a real kind of in-depth affiliation for you?
Well, I have to say that my career in Rossini and my propensity, if you want to call it, of singing this music, or my natural ability, was introduced to me when I was in college by my voice teacher, who had a voice that was similar. And I have the background of having sung gospel. I had a very flexible voice. I had a voice that was high lying. It sat high. It moved well. And those were natural, I think, attributes for the music of Rossini. So he introduced me to the music of Barber of Seville many years ago. And this was during the time of the three tenors, Pavarotti, Domingo, Carreras. And I wanted to sing all the other music. I wanted to sing Verdi, Puccini. I wanted to die on stage. I wanted to do everything else. And so I remember doing a few competitions early on in my career. And fortunately, I was successful in them. But one time there was a teacher who pulled my teacher to the side, a teacher that was not from our school. And she said, this is not his rep. You need to find what's right for him. So it was after that he introduced me to Eco Ridente from Barber Seville. So he told me to take it home, and I took it home grudgingly. I wasn't happy about it because, again, I wanted to die. And the music of Rossini didn't seem like it was going to give me that opportunity. But I took it home and I came back at my lesson, not really enthused, not really excited about singing it, but I sang the first string, Ecco ridente in cielo. And he said, wait. He said, sing that again. And I sang it. He said, this is your voice. This is what your voice was meant to do. And so it was there that I began then to explore many things. And of course, we in opera today, we don't celebrate always. We hadn't celebrated the titles of Rossini like we do the titles of Verdi, Puccini, and Mozart. Those are the real staples of the opera repertoire. But I then began to explore the wonderful music of not only Rossini, but Donizetti and Bellini, and realized that there was a specific special category that my voice seemed to fit into.
How did you learn about Giovanni David? Because for those that are listening that don't know about your album and your tour concerts with Michael Spires called Amici e Rivali. This is as good a time as any to say the two of you really kind of delved into the archives. The idea being that the other tenor that
Andrea
Rossini
Dozzari.
wrote, yeah, exactly, Andrea Nozzari, for whom Rossini wrote the other lead part in Ermione, is someone that he wrote lead parts in a lot of these other Neapolitan scores for, along with Giovanni David. And their voices were complementary of one another in the sense that Nozzari's voice was beefier and a little darker, and David was the one who had the kind of lighter, more flexible, higher voice. And yet, sometimes Rossini wrote duets in which their voices intertwine. And actually, and for those people who said, oh, that style of singing is gone forever, I'm one that grew up when the Met did The Italian Girl in Algiers, when Marilyn Horne became a hot new property right after her debut there half a century ago. And there really was no Rossini tenor or Rossini bass to sing Lindoro or Mustafa. So those parts were cut and sort of fudged. And we never would have dreamt that there would have been tenors like you and Michael Spires to come along. So
Mm-hmm.
how did that all happen?
Well, the Amici e Rivali project came as Michael and I, we've known one another for a while. And I was asked to do a concert in Amsterdam, and they said, who would you like to sing the concert with? And I thought, who would I like to? Michael and I have been talking about doing this. I had this dream of singing the duets, which I think are so important. And there are many people that came before me, specifically American bel canto tenors. We have, of course, Rockwell Blake. We have Chris Merritt, we have Bruce Ford, we have Gregory Kunde, we have Paul Austin Kelly. There's a lot of them, even Richard Croft. There's a lot of people who sang this repertoire. And so there's a history of people that had done it. But then when we had this concert at the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, where we picked the repertoire specifically of music that featured, I guess that was premiered by Giovanni David and Nozzari, is that we wanted to show the great, obviously, the great mastery of Rossini, who was so important to both Michael and my career overall, our whole career. And so when we did this concert, there was such a positive response from the audience, the standing ovations and the real desire to hear more and more and more. And so after we walked off stage, we had done 2 encores. And then I said, I think that there's a project here. And so I looked to see if there had ever been anything done that featured just the duets, the tenor duets of Rossini, and there hadn't been. Of course, Merritt and Blake had performed many operas together, and incidentally, Michael and I have never performed an opera on stage together, which is crazy.
Interesting.
Never performed on stage, which we're trying to make that happen. But we thought we'd do this project, and so that's how we brought together all the wonderful duets from Elisabetta and Giterra, as you spoke before. He actually sang Figaro from the Barber of Seville, and we did that duet. We did a mixture, but it featured the writing of Rossini, how he could write so wonderfully for close, similar voices. There are some similarities in our voices, of course, stark differences. But that's how the project Amici e Rivali came together. And we have one in about 2.5 weeks from now. We'll do another one in Bratislava of this concert that's been so successful.
That's terrific. It's good to hear that project still has legs, and also really interesting to hear about the background and hearing the names of all of those Americans. And of course, here you are, both Americans. You sort of have to ask either what's in the water or what is it that we're actually doing right in terms of our training, that so many of fine Americans are actually becoming established internationally in this particular rep. A little bit about the characters, and this is the opportunity to give the two of you to sort of defend the characters that you play. Angela, you've played your share of heroines that have their good qualities and also their bloodthirsty ones. And Hermione is one where, she's pretty moody. And another sort of question mark that hovered over my head as I was going through this was, all right, I looked over all of the rest of the operas and the heroines in them that Rossini wrote for Naples, starring Isabella Colbran. And she's generally the noble person or the put upon person who gets to sing a rondo finale when things go well, or if things don't go well, she's martyred and everybody feels sorry for her when the curtain goes down. But Hermione can be hard to love at times. Is that a challenge in terms of playing a character whose mood swings are that off the charts?
I don't know. I kind of find it fun. I find it fun that she's not, the weeping willow in the corner, and that thinks she's powerful, but necessarily isn't powerful. That she likes to just sort of throw around her feelings, says what she needs to say to get what she wants to get. And it's interesting that she doesn't, die at the end, and she's not, like you said, not the one we sort of feel sorry for at the end. We feel sorry for Oreste and for Pirro. And I find it a really interesting part. It's a sort of unlike any of the other sort of characters that I sing, both vocally and with the character.
It's interesting because you're right. She does not die. Pirro does, and the way that comes about is that in a fit of rage, Hermione says, "Oh, God, I want him dead," and she charges Oreste with the murder, and he says, "Okay," and goes off and kills him, and then he comes back and he says, "All righty, I did it. Are you happy?" She says, "Well, I didn't mean it."
Right. I didn't say actually to do it. You're mistaken.
Exactly. And then, his friend Pilate basically comes in and says, "Dude, this is a mess. It's time to go home." And they literally kind of bodily carry him away. And Larry Brownlee, the other characters that Giovanni David played, like Ilo in Zelmira, or Uberto in La Donna del Lago, or Rodrigo in Otello, are variations of noble or thoughtful or sad. Oreste is pretty high strung. Do you have to sort of calm yourself down to say, okay, don't let the emotion catch you up in this while you're singing?
I had a teacher a long time ago. She said you have to sing with a cool head and a warm heart, not a hot head and a cool heart. And so for me, you have to be under control. And Rossini, the characters that you mentioned, yes, they it seems like the returning theme is struggle between duty and love, duty and love, duty and love. Of course, he loves Hermione, but he feels like he has a duty that he has to do. He comes back from war. He does all this thing where he's at service, but he has this constant struggle. So yeah, you have to try to make sure that you don't get taken away, get overpowered or get carried away with what you need to do. And I think you have to use the music to express that emotion that you can really intensify your thought process by trying to spell out what is being said, using the tools of Rossini, the coloratura, all of the dynamic markings to really to give that character some texture and some real impact and dynamic variance.
It's really interesting. It's interesting what you're saying, Larry, about the warm heart and the cool head. But you have to be exactly the same when you're conducting. As well, because if you let yourself get totally carried away by the emotions of the music, then you're an absolute wreck at the end of it, because you've been in it and in a, on fire for 3 hours, but also you're not serving the needs of the performers, because if you're just totally wrapped up in your hot-headedness, then you're not really reacting to what singers are giving you and what the instrumentalists are giving you, and being able to pull it all together. So it's something though that I don't think everyone realizes when they watch a performance, that how much the performers have to be, how much of the time we let ourselves go, and how much of the time we have to just walk that fine line. And
how important a conductor is to this. And I want to get back to that. And I'm not saying this just because you're here, Antony, but one of the wonderful things about concert opera performances is that knowing how gifted a singer you are yourself, you're, in the best sense of the word, a singer's conductor, because you know how much breath it takes, what is a tempo that works best for the piece and is within the capabilities as you sort it out in rehearsals with the singers, in terms of where their technique meets what's going to be the best for the composer. And that's a whole skill, which brings me back for a second to the Amici e Rivali project. As I was listening to that recording and just sort of, spinning around the room about how good it was, the thought suddenly occurred to me like a light bulb going off over my head. Yes, these singers are really good, but the orchestra is really terrific. And then I thought, well, the orchestra is really terrific because the conductor, Corrado Rovaris, really has a feel for this, and everybody seems to be on the same page in terms of how to present this music. So, which kind of leads me to the question of, Larry talked about how gospel was a kind of natural extension once this type of music suddenly presented itself, and coloratura not seeming like the most oddball thing. There was at least some sort of precedent in terms of, well, that gospel music may be tricky, but I can do that. And transferring that over is possible. Is singing coloratura something that can be a learned skill, or do you kind of have to be born with it, do you think? What are your thoughts?
Can I just say one thing, you guys, to everybody on the call? This is about the time we're going to get into Q&As in a few, so please don't be shy and feel free to type in some questions for our fine artists too that I will ask in a minute.
Briefly, let me say about the whole coloratura, the idea of having a coloratura. I think you have to have the natural ability. Some voices just don't naturally move well. My voice, Angela's voice, which, it's a voice that also does things like Verdi and Puccini as well. She has the ability to move her voice and to be able to be expressive with the fioratura, the movie stuff. So I think you need to have a natural affinity and can learn how to do it better. Someone who's not born with that ability, I think they shouldn't, pursue the music of Handel, Bach, Rossini, Mozart, because I think you just need a sense of flexibility in your voice naturally to be able to do it.
I've actually taught I've taught a couple of tenors how to sing coloratura who absolutely had no clue how to do it.
Oh wow.
And but they struck me as singers who should be, because they had they had lighter sounds, and they had a reasonably easy vocal production. But whenever they were trying to sing coloratura, one of the things that some young singers, the mistake they make when they're trying to sing coloratura, if they've had no experience with it, is they try to sing it too loudly, of course, as you both know. And so just trying to get singers to sort of like sing mezza voce through just the middle of their range phrases, and to start slowly, speed it up, just do all sorts of little tricks here and there. And so there's this guy who's there were two tenors I had singing two different Handel operas, and it's not, the coloratura is not the same as Rossini. But in the end, one of the tenors actually sang the coloratura in his Ariodante arias faster than the orchestra could play it.
Oh, really?
Which was fantastic.
And wouldn't you say probably he did have the ability to sing it?
Yes, I think
That's
so.
the
But he
thing.
didn't.
The access to it probably, and the understanding of it, I think probably wasn't there. But the natural ability, I think, probably. You said you heard in its sound, it was there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there are a few singers I've worked with over the years who said, "Oh, I can't do that." And I said, "Well, why don't we try? Let's try it this way and see if we can do this." And sometimes it's not possible, you know. Sometimes people, you know, sometimes it's more about what's in one's own head.
I agree.
Yes, I think it's a mental block that people have with it rather than necessarily a vocal block with it.
Yeah.
I still remember how.
No, I was saying really quickly. Angela said something about when Will Crutchfield approached her. She said, "I can't do this." But
it was a mental block. It was a mental block. I was like, "No, that's too hard. It's too many notes to remember and too many patterns to do, and my voice doesn't do that." But it did. It was a mental block. It was my own. I was in my own way.
Yeah, I still remember the first time that Renee Fleming sang a Rossini role in a major venue was when she did Armida at the Pesaro Festival. And she had helped support her educational career by working as a jazz singer in clubs. When she discovered that a lot of the coloratura in Armida was not that different from singing scat, it's like opened whole new vistas. It's like, oh, you can do this after all.
Well, you know, that's also one of the reasons I'm being only slightly facetious here, but I think that's one of the reasons that some American singers have a great success with Rossini, through and some African American singers with gospel music, and the sort of ornamentation and the freedom of the vocal technique that's released when you do that. And as you say, through, you know, the Great American Songbook and jazz and scat traditions, I think that's one way to access that type of singing.
Exposure.
Yeah, right. And the way I got into Rossini was also, I used to, as a young singer, I had a very light voice, and I used to sing Bach and Handel and Mozart quite a lot. It wasn't my degree, but I was just, you know, when people worked out that I could sing this stuff, they asked me to do it. And then it's weirdly enough, in some respects, it's not as huge a jump from singing some of the big opera seria of Handel to some of the roles in Rossini. In other respects, it is a huge jump, but you can, but I entered Rossini that way through earlier music and looking forward. Some people enter Rossini backwards, you know, from singing, you know, the bigger Italian rep and then sort of scaling it back down. I mean, there are all sorts of ways into it, but that was my way in.
It's a whole interesting thing, and I think that people like Phil Gossett and Will Crutchfield and Alberto Zedda have made us aware that you're better off taking Rossini on his own terms rather than what used to be done, which is sort of beginning with the idea that Rossini knew at the time that he was writing his operas what the late operas of Verdi sounded like, and then interpreting them in modern performances through the lens of late Verdi rather than on their own discrete Rossinian early mid 19th century terms.
Well, I just can't thank Peter. You've been amazing on this. Should we move on from this part and go to Q&A, or what do you think, Peter?
Do we have questions?
We do this time, and thank you so much for all of your work on this, Peter. We just have a couple. I'm hoping we get a few more. Maybe, don't be shy. Okay, so the first one is about Angela, the audio clip or the video that we watched. what is that high note that Angela hit?
Oh, it's a D. It's a high D.
Yeah.
Woo!
That's great. I love that. That was a nice surprise when I heard that the first time.
Well, you'll hear it again in DC.
He puts the D in DC.
Angela, speaking of this, how did Ermione come to being for you in the first place? Because I don't know for sure if I can make this statement that nobody has ever sung the role of Ermione more times than Angela Meade. But I think that that's pretty accurate, because between Lyon, Paris, A Coruña, Moscow, and then the bicentenary production in Naples, that's a lot of
times.
Now, who first approached you about this particular opera?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. So after I'd sung Semiramide, and I had also covered Renee when she did Armida here at the Met, and both times she did it. And I was like, I started looking at more Rossini, and I was like, I really like Ermione. It'll probably never come to fruition because nobody ever does it, right? So in 2015, my husband and I were preparing for our wedding, and Coruña was supposed to do it. I had no idea Coruña was supposed to do it, but I got a call 3 weeks, I think, before my wedding, and they were like, so-and-so has canceled this production. It was just this concert in A Coruña, Spain. Would you like to jump into it? And I was like, seriously? 3 weeks to learn this role and do my wedding at the same time, finish the wedding stuff, and leave the day after I got married. And I was like, sure, why not? So I put it all together and went and did it. And then that was with Alberto Zedda. And then he took it on tour. We went to Moscow, and then to Lyon, and then to Paris, the Champs-Élysées. And then Napoli called and said, would you come and do it, a production of it? So I've done it both staged and in concert, and then doing it here. So I've done it more times than I ever thought I would do it, but it's a role I love, and I'm so happy every time it comes up.
So good.
That's great. And also for young singers, that whole idea of you just never know.
You just never know.
Yeah.
All right. So what were we saying? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that now Angela and I, we have talked about trying to get somebody to do it as far back as we've been like,
it's difficult.
Okay,
it's difficult to get anybody to do it.
The first thing we hear is that it doesn't sell as an opera or something like that. But I think, my campaigning says that somebody needs to do it for the voices, and let the voices be the draw, and let them do it, where then it becomes more about like the phenomenal writing that Rossini has put there. So I truly believe that there is a place that it can happen while we can still all sing it. So hopefully that ship hasn't sailed yet.
I hope not. Yes, it's true. I mean, I think that's why I've done it in concert so many times, is because nobody wants to mount a production of it. So because they think it won't sell, so they don't want to do 5 and 6 performances of it. So
that's expensive too.
You guys have decided to do it. Yes, it is expensive.
It's expensive to have the level of singer required for Andromaca and Piero, and of course Ermione, and also Oreste. So this also makes it problematic.
Yeah, it's interesting because all the reasons that you were talking about, and going back to also what Peter was saying about the structure of the opera, it's really interesting because it starts off with this sinfonia where there's chorus, which is really highly unusual. But it's a really interesting effect, because you just don't expect it. You think, you start off with this wonderful sinfonia, and then you go Troia, and they start to, and you say, what the heck is that? So immediately you know that it's not a cookie cutter standard, opera from the first 20 years of the 19th century.
Yeah,
and then the big scena, I mean, the emotional climax of the piece really is the Gran Scena di Ermione, which is in Act 2, which is a good place for climax, obviously. But that is a huge scene that that, you know, Peter was saying the structure of it is a little flexible. It's got the elements of the you know, the cavatina cabaletta, but it's sort of stretched a little out of shape, according to her sort of like her psychological state at the time as well. And so that was probably a bit discombobulating, and the way it ended too, with the, you know, the murder of Piero. And it's like, and I think the audiences weren't quite ready for the strength of character of this incredible woman. But we are now. It's a you know, it's an opera that you know, the strength of character of the title role is something that is, you know, celebrated and is not unusual by any stretch of the imagination. So I think that's one of the reasons that it could also work really well.
All right, so this is awesome. So I think that everybody wants to go do it now in full production too. And this kind of leads us to our next question. People are wondering, when you're training musical, do you learn how to act in a concert opera? So they wanted you all to speak a little bit more about doing a concert version, perhaps of Ermione or anything. Do you prefer seeing concert version, or would you like doing the differences for you doing it like this?
So I love doing concert opera. I think the big difference is in a concert, you don't get the sets, the costumes, the stage director telling you what movements they want you to do that you haven't, you know, what their concept is. So you have your own concept, and you have to really know what every word you're saying is and what everybody is saying to you, so that you can really be behind the emotions and the intent of the whatever's happening in the scene. Versus, you know, sometimes on stage, if you're in a stage production, you should do the same thing, but it is easier to get away with not than it is in a concert.
It is. And I think when you do a concert performance, I think there's more responsibility on you as the singer, as the actor, to be a better listener. And I feel like you have to respond to let the impact of what your colleague on stage is saying to you, that you can feel the drama because two people are communicating. And I remember one of my good friends, he's a stage director named Moishe Leiser. He said, the thing that's lost in acting is people don't listen. And so listening on stage, when you're on stage and active with someone else, is really important. So I put more responsibility. I've changed in that way because, as Angela said, it was like, you know, you have the costume, you have someone else doing the work for you, you have an extra, you have a prop, you have something that tells the story that you don't have to as much. But when it's all stripped away, you have to rely on the dynamics, the colors, the expressivity, all the other things to really bring the drama to life. So
it's also interesting when because I know that sometimes you sing slightly differently when the orchestra is in front of you or when it's behind you. Because when the orchestra is behind you, you feel this sort of this wall of support coming from behind you, and you're reacting in different ways. That's something that singers have told me quite a lot. And also, you know, in Lisner, there are no television monitors, so you know, you don't see the conductor in the same way, but you feel supported by the orchestra and what I'm doing with the orchestra behind you. And so it's a very direct, it's an even more direct communication than when you're coming across the footlights and across the orchestra pit. And that's something that our audience really love, that just that immediacy of it all.
I agree with all of the above and would say that there are some operas that really benefit in the year 2023 from concert as opposed to staged presentations. In doing the research for this, I was reminded that when Santa Fe did this, they had a European stage director reset the opera in an antebellum Southern plantation, whatever. And I'm always reminded that our major publications keep telling us that when the Messiah presents himself or herself to reveal what the future of our art form it will be, it's not going to be in the form of a composer, a conductor, or a singer, but as a stage director. And I will just put that there quietly and then just run for the exit
We'll have to say
as
that
fast as possible, because it's just one of those things
antebellum
that always.
and an
Yeah.
antebellum version of this Hermione. I just sort of, I don't know. There's something in that. Yeah. I'm curious with Angela and Larry, what if there are other Rossini roles in particular they haven't tackled that they're interested in, and why. Just so while we're on the sort of Rossini role or other bel canto that they're really looking, interested in trying, and why.
Larry,
Angela?
I mean, I don't know that I have an answer to that. I think I've done all the Rossini that I probably will do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's an honest answer. I don't think that anybody's going to ask me to sing Semidamide anymore. And Armida never comes up. And the other ones that I've done are
William Tell, yeah?
Yeah, William
I
Tell.
did William Tell. Yeah, I guess I would do that again if it came up. But and then I sang Sinaïd and Moïse, which I thought was strange when they asked me to do that instead of Anaïd. But so I don't know. I mean, I love Ermione. I would sing it many more times. The rest of them, I guess if an Armida came up, I would sing it. But I don't know about the other
never
stuff.
happens.
Never does, yeah.
It never happens because there's too many tenors in it.
Blame it on the tenors. But no,
how many of you are you? 7, 8, something like that?
Like 5, I think, 5 or 6. But there's a lot of things, that of course for the repertoire that I do, there's a lot of things. Duca d'Alba, no one ever does. Linda di Chamonix. Another one I want to do is what is it? Matilde di Chabran is another one I would like to sing. Beatrice di Tenda is one that I would like to sing. I haven't sung Il
Harry, I'm
Pirata
singing
yet.
Beatrice this year.
But not with me. So,
no, not with you.
So I mean, there are many things, and it depends on where it is. Sometimes a lot of European houses will do them before some of the American houses will or can do them. So hopefully, if I continue to campaign, some of these titles will come. Will come to fruition. What I'd like to do.
Keep campaigning.
Well, there we go. Beatrice di Tenda. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
That's a great title.
Larry, the only one of the Rossini David parts you have not done complete is Ricciardo e Zoraide, right?
I have not. That's the only one, which I haven't done that one yet. But someone told me that was problematic because of the racial element that's in it. And so I actually don't fully know the story, but I was talking to someone and they were like, well, I guess it would be kind of hard to do. Obviously, I did Rossini's Otello. We tried to find a way around that. But I think someone can imagine it, extracting that out. I think we have enough artistic license now to do something like that. So if it comes, I definitely would be interested in doing that.
Well, I don't want to keep you guys. There's 2 more questions, but I think we can probably answer. Nancy Kilpatrick wanted to know if it's hard to travel around the world. It's hard on your voice.
Yes. It's hard on everything.
You all to say yes, it's hard for them.
It's hard. You have to find your own routine. I have to say, for me, I try to find my own rhythm. When I get into a city, I try to find some normalcy, so I can feel like being on the road is more like home. But it does present demands and challenges that we would rather not deal with, but we have to kind of like understand ourselves and our own rhythm so we can be okay wherever we are.
It's a good answer, Larry.
And then someone else wants to know if you guys have approached Santa Fe for mounting Ermione. So there you go.
Angela's going to make a call right after this.
I am. Let me just get my phone out.
Angela's going to call. Right. I mean, but that's a pretty good cast. Angela Meade. We could do something really, nice, and maybe even bring Antony Walker if he's not too busy. But he's pretty busy, so.
I'd love to. My pleasure.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for joining us, and Peter Russell for leading this today. It was just awesome to have everybody here. So, and thank you everybody who's on the call who zoomed in for this webinar. We really love having you all. And if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, reminder, they're going fast. So December 2nd, which is a Saturday, 6 p.m. Tickets as low as $44. Okay. So thank you guys. Have a wonderful
Thank
day.
you all very much. We cannot wait, and safe journeys to all our artists, and may you enjoy wonderful performances of the rest of your runs.
And happy
Thank
Thanksgiving.
you.
Yes.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
You.
Thanksgiving
you.
to you all.
See you soon. Yay. Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye, everybody.